Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting focused on the campaign to free Mohammed al-Halabi. Thank you all for joining us for this vital event. My name is Barry. I'm the Secretary of Brighton and Hove Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and tonight's meeting is hosted by BHPSC. The focus of tonight's meeting, as you know, is the shocking case of Mohammed al-Halabi, a Palestinian aid worker from Gaza who has been incarcerated in Israeli prisons for over 5 years, falsely accused of embezzling large amounts of money from an international aid charity and diverting the funds to Hamas. I won't review the details of the case because we have three speakers tonight who are far better placed to do this than I am. We're highlighting Mohammed's case partly because the international community really needs to mobilize to put pressure on the Israeli regime to release him, but also because Mohammed's case illustrates the brutality and immorality of Israel's treatment of the Palestinian people and the impunity with which it operates. So I'm delighted to welcome our three speakers. We'll first of all hear from Asa Winstanley. Asa is an investigative journalist based in London. Many of you will know Asa from his frequent contributions to the Electronic Intifada, where he is associate editor and co-host of EI's podcast. Asa has been a particular friend to Brighton and Hove PSC, and he's covered some of the local cause célèbre in recent years. After Asa, we'll hear from Khalil al-Halabi, Mohammed's father. For 4 decades, Khalil worked for UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, as an education supervisor in the Gaza Strip. And he's recently written eloquently in the Guardian newspaper about his son's predicament. And finally, we'll hear from Andrew Feinstein. Andrew is a South African now based in the UK. He was an ANC member of the post-apartheid South African National Assembly in the 1990s. Here in the UK, Andrew is executive director of Corruption Watch UK, and he writes and lectures on South Africa and the global arms trade. So let's make a start. It's a great pleasure to welcome Asa Winstanley. Asa, over to you.
Well, thanks, Barry. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining us. I'll just start with an outline of Mohammed's case and what we're here, which is what we're all here to discuss. Mohammed al-Halabi is a senior Palestinian aid worker with the global Christian charity World Vision. In June 2016, he was kidnapped by Israeli army thugs during a routine trip between World Vision's Jerusalem and Gaza offices. He's been languishing in Israeli jails ever since and has still not faced trial. So Israel has falsely accused Mohammed of diverting millions of dollars in World Vision funds to Hamas, which is a Palestinian political party and armed resistance movement in the Gaza Strip, which was elected to run the Palestinian Authority government in 2006. But Israel has falsely accused Mohammed of stealing money and of diverting it away from World Vision's Gaza branch, where Mohammed is the director of operations. But Mohammed al-Halabi has been repeatedly cleared of these accusations. Internal investigations by World Vision itself and by the Australian government, who are one of World Vision's major funders, both found that there was no evidence that Mohammed had done anything wrong. World Vision, I just read today in the Guardian long read about this, that according to that journalist's source, he doesn't state his source as an anonymous source, but according to his source, World Vision paid $7 million to investigate these claims, which just highlights the damage that Israeli false accusations can have. So they paid $7 million to hire a forensic auditing firm and a specialist law firm to investigate Israel's false allegations against them. And all these investigations completely exonerated Mohammed. And they'd even found that Mohammed had gone out of his way to distance the charity from Hamas because, Mohammed is not a political supporter of Hamas. So Israel has not presented any evidence to support any of its claims against Mohammed. And yet they were taken seriously by most of the mainstream media and by Western racist governments. The journalists who took these false allegations at face value to start with have now all lost interest in this now that Israel's story has fallen apart. Israel hasn't presented any evidence of its claims, like I said. So the case that the Shin Bet, Israel's secret police, has fabricated against Mohammed isn't even a competent forgery. They claimed that he stole a total of more than $50 million from World Vision over the course of 7 years. But it turns out that actually that amount is more than double World Vision's entire budget for the Gaza Strip. So it wouldn't have been possible to steal that amount of money anyway, even in the first place. So, the claims are completely outlandish and ridiculous. So as is normal behavior for the thugs of the Israeli apartheid regime, Mohammed has been tortured in prison. This is something that happens habitually with Palestinian prisoners under Israeli occupation. A UN official has confirmed that his treatment may amount to torture. And in the initial stages, he was just disappeared when he was returning to the Gaza Strip, his home in the Gaza Strip from the Jerusalem offices of World Vision. He was just disappeared. Initially, his colleagues didn't know what had happened to him. He was just disappeared without trace, interned without trial, and he was tortured and initially denied access to a lawyer. But even now, his lawyer, Maha Hanna, is systematically denied access to witnesses, the ability to review evidence, and astonishingly, and this is something Mohammed's father, Khalil, who you hear from after me, told me about, Mohammed's lawyer, Maha, was even banned from writing his own notes during court hearings. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's horrific. It's a new definition of Kafkaesque. Mohammed's lawyer wasn't allowed to, he wasn't given copies of the so-called evidence against Mohammed, but he wasn't even allowed to write notes. And they've threatened him that he wasn't allowed to write notes summarizing any of the evidence or, his own interpretation of the evidence. And they even threatened him with legal case against the lawyer if he wrote any notes like that. And they demanded access to his laptop as well to check that he hadn't done this. So you can see that the odds are really stacked against Mohammed. And many of the court hearings, they're only court hearings because this is not a trial. Israel hasn't given Mohammed a trial because Israel is a racist system of apartheid which doesn't give Palestinians access to a fair trial. Many of these court hearings have actually been held in secret, and all of Israel's so-called evidence against Mohammed is actually secret evidence which is concocted by the Shin Bet spy agency and their collaborators. Israel's court system is not a legitimate legal system. I think this is really important to emphasize. Palestinians in the West Bank are prosecuted in military courts in which the conviction rate is 99.7%, a staggering figure. It's practically 100%, 99.7%. And by any standards, this is a kangaroo court. It's just a facade of justice. It's not any kind of credible legal system. And it's also a racist kangaroo court. Israeli Jews are given civilian trials, while Palestinians are judged and prosecuted by the Israeli army, by actual Israeli army officers. And this is the very definition of apartheid. And even in Mohammed's case, the Jerusalem Post, right-wing Israeli English language newspaper, even their editorial said that the case against him, the court cases against him, are more akin to the so-called military justice system. So these separate forms of separate legal system for Israeli Jews and for Palestinians are the very definition of apartheid. Another example of how the odds are stacked against Mohammed, how the system is rigged against Palestinians, is that one of the Israeli judges in 2017 put pressure on Mohammed and urged him to accept a plea deal, to admit that he'd done something that he hadn't done. And the judge said to him, quote, "You've read the numbers and statistics, you know how these issues are handled." So these aren't the actions of a democracy. The United Nations Special Rapporteur Michael Lynk last year demanded that Israel either gives Mohammed a fair trial or releases him, saying, and Michael Lynk said, "What is happening to Mr. al-Halabi bears no relation to the trial standards we expect from democracies, and is part of a pattern where Israel uses secret evidence to indefinitely detain hundreds of Palestinians." So this bears no relation to the trial standards we expect from democracies. That's kind of diplomat speak for saying that Israel is not a democracy, which, you know, is a rare admission from a UN official. So because Mohammed has insisted on having his day in court, no matter how much the odds are stacked against him, the Israelis are desperately pressuring him to accept a plea deal in which he agrees to admit to a lesser charge and then probably be released on time served. And speaking via his lawyer, Mohammed has accused Israel of engaging in what he calls, quote, a fishing exhibition against World Vision. And I totally agree with that analysis. So the actions of Israel in trying to force Mohammed to accept a plea deal, despite such high-profile allegations against him and against World Vision, are very telling. The Israelis want to be able to have a new weapon to use against humanitarian aid programs in Gaza. You know, if Mohammed signs this deal, they'll be able to say, "Oh, look, well, he was convicted of stealing charity funds and giving them to so-called terrorist group." And Benjamin Netanyahu himself put out, you know, when the Israelis came out with these outlandish allegations against these false and concocted allegations against World Vision and against Mohammed al-Halabi, Netanyahu himself took to his YouTube account. I watched the video earlier today, and, you know, it got tens of thousands of views, and he has the audacity and the chutzpah to be saying in the video, "I, as the Prime Minister of Israel, care more about Palestinians than their own leaders." And then he's accusing Palestinian armed groups of stealing from the Palestinians. This is just the typical kind of Israeli lies. And it shows that they want to have this pressure point against humanitarian, not even resistance organizations, or even, you know, campaigning organizations. Of course, they act against them too, but against charity organizations, against humanitarian organizations like World Vision. So it's really, really telling. They want to have this new weapon to use against humanitarian aid programs in Gaza. So the work of international charities in Gaza, while it isn't resistance in itself, it can make it harder for Israel to fully control the Gaza Strip. The Israelis want to be free to impose the same siege on Gaza that they have for 14 years with outside interference and without, you know, these sort of pesky human rights groups getting involved, because it can put a spanner in the works for their plans sometimes. So Israel's defamation war against Mohammed and against World Vision is part of Israel's war against Palestinian existence. It's part of Zionism's long genocidal war against the indigenous people of Palestine. If Israel succeeds in forcing Mohammed to recant and sign a false confession to having stolen aid money in order to help a non-resistance group, it will give the Israelis a powerful new tool in its war against the humanitarian organizations, which work to alleviate Palestinian suffering, the same suffering which Israel caused in the first place. So Mohammed obviously knows all this, and that's, you know, that's why he's refusing to sign. You know, he's doing it out of a point of principle, really, and he knows that his colleagues and friends will suffer more as a result of if he gives in and signs this. So in holding out like this is really something I find quite admirable and moving, because he's resisting Israel's apartheid regime in his own way. And he's paid the price, and he is paying the price. All of this has caused great suffering for him and his family. I'll just end on a little story. When I first wrote about Mohammed's case in my Middle East Monitor column last year, his father, Khalil, who you're going to hear from next, wrote to me an email thanking me and, for my support in trying to get the truth out about Mohammed's case. And he sent me a photo with Mohammed's children smiling and looking in good spirits and giving a thumbs up. And then, and I found that really moving and heartening to receive this photo. And earlier today, I read the Guardian's long read about Mohammed, and it contains a newer photo of Khalil with Mohammed's children. His youngest son, Faris, who was a baby in the photo that Khalil emailed me last year, he's now growing into a young boy who barely knows his father. The eldest two teens are now, young men. And just to see the contrast between the two photos, I just found it really incredibly sad, because those are years of the children's lives that Mohammed and his family will never get back. And that is something that Israel has stolen from Mohammed and has stolen from Mohammed's children, from Mohammed's wife, from Khalil, from the whole family. And it's a really part of a despicable racist project to impose a European settler colony in the heart of the Arab world. And this is the price of the so-called Jewish state in Palestine, is these kinds of injustices against the indigenous people of Palestine. And as we know, Mohammed's case is only one of untold numbers of injustices against Palestinians. There are any form of Palestinian existence, let alone resistance, is oppressed by Israel in similar ways, in this way and in similar ways. So that's why it's incumbent upon all of us to campaign for Mohammed's immediate release, and to do that in any kind of way we can, whether it's writing letters to our MPs, whether it's putting any kind of political pressure on. I don't have all the answers for that, but I know that we need to do more to bring the truth of this case to light, and to delegitimize. It's a propaganda word that the Israelis use to kind of try and attack us in the Palestine Solidarity movement. But a situation of injustice that is not legitimate does need to be exposed and delegitimized. So I'm going to take that word upon myself. Why not? We need to expose the truth of this and to get it to wider recognition. So I'll just leave it with that. And thank you all for listening.
Asa, thank you so much. That's so clear and so inspiring, and such a helpful contextualization of the tragedy of Mohammed's case, and his forbearance and his stamina and that of his family. We have some excellent questions coming in the chat, and we'll turn to those once we've heard from the other two speakers. But let me, without further ado, turn to Mohammed's father, Khalil. Khalil, you are very welcome, and we're very pleased that you're able to join us from Gaza tonight. Please share your thoughts with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Asha, for your powerful words about my son Mohammed, and you summarize 6 years Mohammed in prison, and you summarize all his case in your speech now. But now I want to add something about Mohammed. Mohammed is the victim of the media, of Israeli media. Because as you said, Netanyahu and other Israeli made a huge propaganda in the media during when they arresting him. This is happened in the first 6 months. But I want to tell you, all of you, about what happened to Mohammed. After the Israeli knows the real Israeli government investigation and know the reality, this is they made a propaganda. They put Muhammad under pressure and offer to him to accept a deal. In the third month, they want from him to accept deal and to release him, to accept, to convince about still charges, to release him. But Muhammad refused all this offer. Why? Because Muhammad, he is not liar to say something he didn't do it. They want from him to convince about any charge. Now, about any charge. Do you know how many deals they offered to him? 10 deals till now to convince about any charge to release him. But Muhammad refused all of it. My question, who preferred the prison to be in the prison or to be free? He preferred to be in the prison and not to be liar. If he convinced about any charge, maybe he's a liar. What he want to say to his family, to his community, he is liar, because they know if he convinced about any charge, he is a liar. Muhammad preferred to be in the prison, not to be a liar, to convince about any charge. This is what Muhammad said about it. In the last court session, they also offered to him a deal to convince about anything to release him. But Muhammad refused. And I want to clarify something also. The Israeli put the lawyer under pressure. How? They want the lawyer to pressure Muhammad to accept a deal. But Muhammad refused. Also, Israel in the prison also brought a collaborator inside the court, in the last court, to say the collaborator, I hear that Muhammad say something here. The lawyer asked him where, when, he don't know. After this, they discovered this collaborator, he is with a crime record. They know him, he is with the crime record. This is what happened to Muhammad. Also, the lawyer asked the judge, we need the file, the original file. What the judge said to this file lost from the police. Israel. In what time Israel lost the file from Israel? They want now to give the lawyer another file because they changed some statement and some statement in this file. But the lawyer asked the judge to allow to him to bring expert from Israel to discuss about the statement, to compare between the original and the new file. The Israeli expert discovered that there is some forgery in this statement. Israel want to make anything to put Muhammad under pressure to convince about anything. Why? Because now, one from Israeli writer told me, now Muhammad case now embarrassment the Israeli government. Embarrassment, because they are liar. Also, the judge told Muhammad during the inside the court, do you want the world and the international community said about us, we are liar in your case? you want to convince about anything. They want from him to convince about any charge because they want the world not to say they are liar in Muhammad case. This is now the problem. Also, Muhammad told the judge, where is your justice? You are surprised what he answered to him. There is no justice for you, for the Palestinian. Where is the justice? There is no justice for the Palestinian. This is a democratic state. Where is the democracy? They asked him, where is the democracy? They answered him, there is no justice for you, for the Palestinian. This is the answer from the judge inside the court. What we expect from them. And now Muhammad face subjected to 166 court session. This is the first time in the history one is subjected to 166 court session. Why? He is killer? No. He made nothing. They accused him and the World Vision and all the government said that Mohammed and World Vision clear from the charges. Now 166 constitution. This is the first time in the history. I read the history. I didn't find anyone face 166 constitution. They want him to get out of embarrassment. This is the aim but they want to get out of the embarrassment at the expense of Muhammad. But Muhammad refused all the deals. Muhammad refused all the deals inside the court. Why? Because he knows himself innocent from this charges. This is what Muhammad. And I want to tell you, and this is my message to all Muhammad, the United Nations named him the humanitarian hero in 2014 because his work humanitarian. Muhammad was a member. Listen to me. I want to send this message to the world. Muhammad was a member of delegation peace when Egypt and Israel signed the agreement peace. How they accused him he is Hamas. Muhammad, this is a famous issue for a famous speech for him. Now all the Gazian knows what Muhammad said. I am a humanitarian man. I distribute aid for all the peoples, not according their political affiliation. If I found Israeli family needs, this speech told the judge inside. If I found Israeli families needs help, I will help. This is Muhammad. Muhammad, he's a humanitarian, but Israel don't want this stage. And I want to tell you something. They accused him to diverted $1 million. This is the shameful of Israel. Now Israel transfer $millions from Qatar government to Gaza for Hamas, and accuse the Palestinian help Hamas. The Israeli government help Hamas. Now they transfer many $1 million to Gaza. For who? For them. This is what the Israeli يعني, they are want to punish the Gazian and to make something against. Also, if Israel arrested anyone in Gaza, they give him the same charges. This is the copy of the charges. They arrested doctor. This is the charges. The same. Compare between the charges with Mohammed and the doctors and the patient and the same charges for the Gazian. Mohammed who helped the farmers, helped the needy families, helped the fishermen, psychosocial for children and others. All these terrorists, when he helped the needy families, this is the terrorism. It's considered a terrorism. No, this is what the Israeli this is not the good path for peace between us, between the Palestinian, and they want to work with us with justice, not injustice, to build the peace bridge between us. This is what I want to send to the world.
Khalil, you have moved all of us.
No, I want to complete.
I'm sorry. I thought you had stopped.
Also, my message now to the Israeli government. First, to apologize to Mohammed about the mistake when they are arresting him. This is also to return the World Vision to work in Gaza, because Gaza in bad need for the humanitarian assistance in Gaza under the leadership of Mohammed al-Halabi. This is the red line. Mohammed, he is the leadership, a humanitarian leadership in Gaza. And to apologize to Mohammed about this mistake. 6 years without any to prove against him any charge. 6 years. Why? This is need to apologize for him. Thank you.
Shukran, Khalil. Shukran. And you have moved us and inspired us, and we, I think, want to do everything we can as part of the international solidarity movement to work with you to free Mohammed. And I can see that many of the questions in the chat are asking this question: what can we do? What can we do? And some ideas about that. So we'll come to those in the Q&A session. But for now, Khalil, shukran, thank you very much for your inspiring words.
Also, another issue, please. Mohammed visited Australia and spoke in Australia Parliament, and now many Australian Parliament friends to Mohammed, not this Parliament, the previous Parliament, to Mohammed. And many people from the world, from Australia, from United States, from UK, many people send their solidarity to Mohammed family. Many of them. I want to put all the letters in my Facebook page. From all the people from United States, from UK, from Australia, from Cyprus, from Germany, sent to Mohammed family their solidarity by letters. I received all the letters from them. Thank you for all of them.
Well, it's good of you, Khalil, to thank us, but it's clearly not enough. And we must do more. We must do more. Before we finish tonight, I think we must identify actions we can take to free Mohammed. But for now, thank you, Shukran, Khalil. And may I now turn to Andrew. Andrew, you're very welcome. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Barry. It's a great honor to appear on a platform with Khalil and Asa. It's in some ways very sad that we even have to have this meeting. And from my perspective, I want to make two observations. The first is the similarity of Mohammed's case with cases that were extremely common in apartheid South Africa, to try and give another dimension to the way in which Israel is using Mohammed to try and achieve certain political objectives. The second thing I want to do is just turn my attention to some thoughts about perhaps what we can do to help Mohammed's case. When I started to read about Mohammed's case, when I was listening now to Khalil talking about his case, I could have been transported back to the South Africa of the 1970s or the 1980s. An authoritarian, militaristic, racist apartheid dictatorship. Because that is what Israel is. But where apartheid South Africa tried to maintain a fig leaf of legal decency to hide its appalling legalized racist conduct, Israel no longer gives a damn because of the support that it receives from the vast majority of so-called Western states. I cannot tell you the number of cases of people who I knew personally where they had been framed on spurious allegations concocted by the apartheid state, detained without trial for indefinite periods of time. But at least in apartheid South Africa, unlike in apartheid Israel today, every 90 days, they had to release the detainees who were detained without charge. They would release them in the prison and they would rearrest them seconds later. In some ways, that was more humiliating. But this was their attempt to create a fig leaf of a functioning legal state. Israel doesn't even bother with that. We are talking about a man whose family have been deprived of him, whose civil society organization has been deprived of him, whose community has been deprived of him for 6 years on trumped up charges, and Israel doesn't even bother to try and create some sort of sustainable legal fiction around his detention. What Mohammed is doing by refusing a plea deal is in the tradition of people of integrity and courage, freedom fighters through many struggles in many parts of the world. I'm sure many of you are aware that throughout their detention by the apartheid state, the leaders of the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and many others, including a number of people who were not affiliated to any political organization, but were still in jail because they dared to believe that a better life was possible for the majority of South Africans. These people were constantly offered plea deals. Renounce violence, renounce the ANC, admit that you do not support democracy, and we will release you. What Mohammed is doing by saying, well, actually, I want my day in court to prove my innocence that is so apparent to everybody but the Israeli state, shows a degree of integrity, a degree of personal courage that is quite remarkable and places him amongst some of the most important people who have engaged in struggles for justice, for democracy, and for the rule of law throughout the ages. In South Africa, there was a concerted effort to target any humanitarian organization that attempted to provide any relief, any succor, any comfort to those who had been displaced, to those who were left without housing, to those who were left without education or meaningful health. And this is one of the reasons why Mohammed remains detained today. He was seen as a way of getting rid of those humanitarian organizations that continue to try and bring some relief to the Palestinian people in their struggle. The difficulty that exists now with Mohammed's case is that regimes like the Israeli regime that don't believe that Palestinians deserve justice or democracy, which, as Asa has said, is the ultimate definition of what an apartheid state does. It dehumanizes those who are not amongst the chosen people. The difficulty for the Israeli state now, as we speak, is that the vast majority of people who have read about Mohammed's case, who have taken an interest in Mohammed's case, know that the Israelis have fabricated a case against an innocent man. But to get a racist, militarized regime to admit that it has made a mistake is an incredibly difficult thing. And what we discovered in South Africa is that in the smallest of battles and in the largest of battles, the oppressor will give up nothing willingly or voluntarily. Every concession eked from the oppressor has to be forced from them by pressure, by sustained pressure. It has to be sustained pressure that overcomes the noise that is created by their media lapdogs, that enables them to continue the fiction of Mohammed's guilt. So that leads us to the question, what can we do? We have a responsibility as people living in the United Kingdom, or if there are people who have joined us from the United States or other countries that have enormous influence in Israel. Because remember, without our money, without our weapons, without our diplomatic support, Israel cannot continue to survive as a racist apartheid state. We have a responsibility as citizens of these countries to exert pressure on our government, to exert pressure on the Israeli government. We need to find ways to embarrass our representatives here so that they exert pressure on the Israeli state to release Mohammed, or at the very least, to give him his day in court. The second thing is, and I might be misinformed here, but I wonder if we have tried with all of the international lawyers groups who we could possibly mobilize in support of Mohammed's case to speak out about this injustice so that we tear away from the Israelis any pretense that there is any legitimacy to this completely illogical and illegal detention. Thirdly, we live in an age where, regardless of one's background, regardless of one's history, if one is critical of Israel, if one attempts to bring change to the situation in the Middle East, one is immediately branded an anti-Semite or similar. I am Jewish. My mother was a Holocaust survivor who lost dozens of members of her family in the Nazi death camps. I introduced the first ever motion on the Holocaust in the history of the South African Parliament. I have lectured at Auschwitz for the Auschwitz Institute on genocide prevention. But because I call Israel a racist apartheid state, it is fine for people, including leaders of the Labour Party, including rabbis, including non-Jews, to call me an anti-Semite, to describe my late mother as a Nazi collaborator because she survived the war, unlike the 39 members of her family who didn't. That is the level to which discourse around Israel and those who defend Israel have stooped. So when it comes to Mohammed's case, when it comes to standing up about the reality of Israel's racism, about the reality of its brutal and illegal occupation of the Palestine territories, we cannot, we must not be silent. We must reaffirm our commitment to anti-racism, opposition to all discrimination and all injustice. And it is in that spirit that we must stand up for Mohammed. And we must say, it is because of actions like this that we must impose boycott, divestment, and sanctions on the Israeli state. And we must get whoever we can, from wherever we can in the world, to support Mohammed's case. And what I will do, having now met Khalil, learned more about Mohammed's case, is I will tomorrow try and speak to my friend and mentor, Archbishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa, and ask him to speak out in support of Mohammed. We have lots of work to do to free Mohammed. We have lots of work to do to support his family and his community. We have a huge amount of work to do to liberate Palestine. But Khalil, if I can say to you and your family, when things feel bleak, as they must have often over the last 6 years, as you have watched this injustice play out, bear in mind that other people have been victorious in their struggles against undemocratic, authoritarian, and unjust rulers. In the mid-1980s, when I was forced to leave apartheid South Africa, if somebody had told me then that within a few years, Nelson Mandela would walk free from jail, and a few years after that would become the country's president, I would have suggested that they needed some assistance because it seemed impossible. But South Africa today has been a democracy for more than 26 years. And just as Mohammed will one day walk free, proving his innocence, just as one day the Palestinian people will be free, we will work with you every day to try and bring those victories closer.
Andrew, thank you so much. The parallel with South Africa and your own experience in South Africa is instructive, and your offer or your determination to mobilize your friend Archbishop Tutu is extremely welcome. And the other name that I wrote down in my notes is Ronnie Casril's. I'm not sure the South African government could be mobilized here, but certainly key members of former members of the South African government and international figures from South Africa have the kind of moral high ground here and could I think have some influence. But I cannot minimize the battle we have on our hands here. Looking through the chat, I can see that Sarah and others have already worked very hard to, as individuals, to interest, let alone mobilize politicians and organizations committed to human rights. Amnesty, I can see from the chat, has, if I've got it right, deprioritized Mohammed's case. This is very disappointing, and I mean, we certainly have local Amnesty branches with Palestine interest groups within them, and I don't know what the chances of getting Amnesty to revisit and change its position on Mohammed. But as a prisoner of conscience, which is what one person in the chat suggested, it looks like that might itself be a battle, which seems extraordinary to me. It also looks very disappointing that World Vision, Mohammed's former employer, has also, I don't know quite how to put this, but has not kept up the pressure on the Israeli regime to free Mohammed. And I don't know if Asa, you have any insight into this, but there's several suggestions in the chat. I wonder, Asa, if I could turn to you just to respond to the general question, which is, what can we do, and your own political analysis of where pressure could most successfully be applied.
Yeah, that's a good question. On the issue of World Vision, I only really know what was reported in Joe Dyke's Guardian article. I found it quite interesting, although I thought it was actually a flawed report in some ways, because it kind of took the Israeli legal system at face value as if it's a legitimate legal system without giving the reality of the systemic injustices inherent in the Israeli legal system as it's applied to Palestinians. But that aside, it contains some really interesting points and some good reporting about the One Vision issue. And he talked to some of the people in World Vision, not One Vision, sorry, some of the people inside World Vision and former employees and so forth. And some of them actually only agreed to speak on condition of anonymity. And this figure of $7 million that was mentioned in his article, I found that astonishing. Like, I didn't know that part, that apparently there was a team of about 20 to 30 people from Deloitte and which is the forensic accounting firm that World Vision hired, from Deloitte and from the lawyers, working together, 20, 30 people working full time on this audit. So they checked, apparently, according to this Joe Dyke article, the long read in The Guardian, they checked every transaction made by World Vision, every single transaction made by World Vision within a 7-year period. I mean, so you can see this is an astonishing amount of work to put into. And the $7 million then starts to make sense. But apparently World Vision considered this to be an existential issue for them, because the immediate response in the immediate aftermath of the Israeli government's false allegations in 2016 was that the Australian and the German government immediately just stopped funding. They stopped funding World Vision. So, then I suppose they were afraid that they would go out of business, for want of a better phrase, and that other governments would then follow suit. Now, of course, once the Israeli government's case against Mohammed, such as it was, completely fell apart, the Australians and the Germans quietly began funding World Vision again. But by then, the damage was already done to Mohammed, obviously. The damage was already done overall. So it's a shame that I think what I will say in terms of what we can do, I think we have to work on delegitimization, which, as I mentioned in my presentation, sort of half tongue in cheek. We have to not accept Israel as a legitimate entity, basically. Israel's legal system is not a legitimate legal system. We have to change we have to work towards changing the political climate in which Israel can just make an allegation like this without any evidence. The Germans and I mean, the German government is a particularly pro-Israel government for historical reasons. But and the Australian government as well is a settler colonial country. So again, there's a historical identification with Israel there. But we have to change the political climate in the Western countries and in the world today, whereby Israel could just make an allegation with no evidence to support it, and the immediate response is, "Oh well, we believe you," from these governments. And that, there's no simple answer to that. It requires political pressure. It requires BDS. It requires campaigning on all these levels, I think. And I would say that we have to work on that. And that's not, unfortunately, that's not a simple answer. And I don't, I often don't have the answers. I'm just trying to kind of expose the reality of the way things are, I guess. But I think that, I think we have to put pressure on these charities as well, to be honest, because I think from the article that I read, some people at World, apparently, according to this Joe Dyke article, some of the higher ups at World Vision actually wanted to throw Mohammed under the bus, but according to the report, they reached a quote unquote compromise, the situation that he's in now. So as far as I last heard, he's still, World Vision are still paying for Mohammed's legal fees. So that's a good thing, and it's a big part of the reason why he hasn't had to accept this false plea deal. So, I mean, I think that, World Vision and these charities, they don't speak out as much as they should be doing, or at all, really, because they fear the money being cut off. And so I think it's down to us to try and change this political climate in the long term, because there have been other Mohammed Halabis. Perhaps Mohammed is a particularly egregious example, and he's Mohammed is his unique self. But there will be other Mohammed Halabis in the future as well, and we have to work to change this climate.
Thank you for that, Asa. I can see that a couple of people are queuing up to ask questions, but Andrew, I think, wants to comment, and then we'll turn. There are a few questions in the chat as well, but Andrew, please go ahead.
Thanks, Barry. Just very quickly, I think that in struggles like this, Asa is quite right. You've got to try and delegitimize, but that is obviously a long-term political task that at the moment feels quite difficult, although there has been some progress over the last months. It has felt like a pretty bleak political space to be working in for the past few years. But I do think that we should be doing something else in parallel, because I think none of these struggles can be resolved by either dealing with what is obviously the political structural issue, as Asa has so eloquently highlighted. But at the same time, I wonder if it isn't worth the Brighton and Hove PSC taking the initiative to try and put together a small group of people, maybe drawn from some of the PSCs around the UK that are active in the way that Brighton and Hove is, to put together a small group of 5 or 6 people who could actually look into all of these potential pressure points where influence could possibly be brought to bear on groups like Amnesty to again make Mohammed's case an important priority, to look at what leverage there might be. For instance, I think it was Tony who might have suggested the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers, if they could help look at legal groups around the world, who could just try and coordinate a little bit to try and build pressure within the United Kingdom that would lead to support for Mohammed.
Well, thank you for that, Andrew. I think it's a perfectly reasonable suggestion. No pressure, of course, on Brighton and Hove PSC to take on responsibility for freeing Mohammed. But we will certainly consider that, and we have good relations with a number of other PSC branches around the country, and it does seem like a major project to get this started. But tonight's the beginning of that, and let me turn to. I can see that Tony and Steve both have their hands up. So, Tony.
Yeah, it's a comment more than a question. I agree with what Andrew said. He's absolutely correct. I also agree with Asa, but the way you delegitimize Israel is precisely by pointing out egregious cases like this. And I don't think any of the cases are more egregious, more outrageous than a case where it's been proven beyond reasonable doubt that no money was stolen, and yet someone is being held in prison because he is alleged to have stolen that money. I mean, that is an utterly Kafkaesque situation. How can you possibly prove your innocence in a situation where no crime has been committed? I mean, you couldn't write a novel about it. It would be dismissed as mere fantasy. So I think we have right on our side. Now, it's unfortunate that it's taken 5-6 years to do this. I have to confess, until I read the Guardian article, I wasn't even aware of this case. But now I have read it. I think we need to act with some urgency. I think the first thing is we have to approach Amnesty International and say, why isn't he a political prisoner? He's clearly done no wrong. He's clearly being held for an indefinite period of imprisonment, and that will go on. And it's clearly a political case. There is no other reason for him being held. And in a judicial system where there's nearly 100% conviction, and where even the judge has told him to plead guilty because the courts will not find him innocent. So amnesty should be approached as a matter of urgency. And I hope that maybe some distinguished people more famous than me, like Andrew himself, Noam Chomsky, Ken Loach and others, will make that approach to amnesty as a matter of urgency. And then the second thing which I've suggested, and I'm sure there are other suggestions, is that the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers should also be asked to take this up and to raise it also with the networks that they must have with international lawyers. And every day this goes on, we must make sure that Israel pays the price until the burden, the cost of holding him is greater than the cost of releasing him. I think that must be our objective. And I will be certainly willing to be part of a group, whether it's from Brighton PSC or a wider network, which takes up this case and sees if we can get to work immediately on ensuring that Mohammed doesn't spend another year in prison. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to call on, well, I think as Tony says, that was more of a comment than a question, but of course, all of our speakers will have an opportunity to respond to these points towards the end. Steve, I'm going to call on you now for your question or comment. Please go ahead.
It is a question, but just I want to thank the speakers. First of all, sorry, I didn't really know about this case, so I've just come to this meeting to find about the details. So well done to Brighton for my angle anyway to hear about this, and thank you to all the speakers and solidarity, obviously, with Mohammed. My question was about just thinking, really. Is there any support inside it? I mean, again, this is from an issue of complete ignorance, but is there any support or knowledge or awareness inside Israel amongst the movement, the peace movement in Israel? Are they aware of this case? Are they doing anything about it? Maybe there's not an answer to that. I don't know. And that's my question, because I think it's quite important what's going on inside as well. That's my question.
I think the answer is pretty straightforward. I'll leave it to others to answer, but I think the answer to your question, Steve, is no. And I don't mean to be defeatist about this, but I think everything that Asa and Andrew have said tonight cumulatively points to a society as well as a regime that is clearly not interested in justice.
Can I just ask, just to follow up on what you said? I mean, obviously, this is from a position of great ignorance, but I mean, is it because people don't know about the case, or just that they know about it, but they're not interested in doing anything about it? I mean, they're different kind of things, really. Okay,
I'm going to stack that question up, Steve, if you don't mind, with one or two others that I can, and hope that you'll get a more civil answer from one of the other speakers. Now, Sarah,
I just wanted to step in if I can. I've sort of I'm unable to know now where to go. I wrote hundreds of letters. I think over 270. We wrote. I think both Khalil. Hello, by the way. It was really nice to see you. I think both of us wrote to all of the foreign offices, as many as we could find. I wrote numerous letters to Amnesty International. I wrote numerous letters to Vision Aid and lots of celebrities. I had 2 replies out of 270 odd letters. One was from Claire Short, who was really interested in taking up the case, but she said she had no power. And also from Baroness Tung, who was also really interested in the case, but felt she had no jurisdiction either. And so I then sort of resent the letters again, And this time got no reply from anywhere. And I sent them all around the world, literally. We were just, there were so many, we just weren't able to keep a log of them all. And so is it lack of interest? I don't know. Maybe because I don't have any influence. But I have tried and tried and tried to get a response from people. It's very frustrating. I get the feeling now that there is a sense of urgency. I do get what Asa says, and I get also what Andrew says. We have to change the sort of global consciousness about the legitimacy of Israel, but we haven't got time. You know, while he languishes inside jail, like you say, for another year, for another 2 years, while we try to change people's minds, it's too long. I feel like we have to do something more direct, more, you know, an action of some sort where there is a lot of footfall. I don't know, maybe we have to go back to protesting. But at the moment, writing letters is just not working. People aren't replying. Like, say, Amnesty International said that they don't have the time to have everybody on their priority list. So what happens is he's been in jail for so long that he's literally dropped off the list. They've let him fall down to the bottom, which is hideous. I even stopped donating to Amnesty International on that basis, and also World Vision. I said to them, look, I donate to you, but I will no longer donate to you if you do not help take action somehow or reply to my letters. They weren't interested. So there's this enormous sense of frustration. And I feel that despite having, I had over 750,000 hits on a video I did explaining his case, had a huge, and it's still being retweeted, had a huge response from the public, from leaders and the international community, nothing. So I'm at a loss where to go and feel quite impotent. So yeah, I think we have to do something with a sense of urgency that we know is going to work. That would be my, I don't know if that's a question or a comment. It's probably both.
Well, Sarah, thank you for that. And it sounds like you've been at least as active as anyone else, with very frustrating results. I really like to end these meetings on an optimistic note, but you know, your experience, and of course we know you and trust you to have shared your experience accurately with us, but the tactics so far haven't worked, and I think your message to comrades on this call tonight is the odd individual letter to the odd individual MP just isn't going to work. I mean, it needs a much more strategic approach, and I'd love to say that, you know, when Andrew calls Desmond Tutu in the morning, the Israeli jails will open their doors and Mohammed will walk free, but that's not going to happen either. It's not to say you shouldn't call Desmond, Andrew, please do, but we need to mobilize a very different kind of campaign for this. Now I make it 10 to 9. Diana, I can see that you've put your hand up, and it's very good to see you.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah,
really,
hi.
What I was thinking, listening to Sarah, and absolute admiration for all the work you're doing. That's fantastic. So many people are, but I genuinely think that without a public campaign, I think you need to get a campaign. We need to get a campaign together with the usual structures, namely, you know, big names and a lot of people. And if necessary, protest outside Amnesty, arrange for a protest outside Amnesty, because I think it's a scandal that they're not doing anything. So frankly, I think it needs more than one person. It needs big names. It needs, the usual thing, Facebook page, Twitter, the usual thing, to get to mobilize and organize together, and so that his name becomes much more prominent. I mean, I'm just thinking of the woman in Iran at the jail, Zadawi, I can't remember.
Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe.
Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. That is just the constant. We don't know, but we do know that if he becomes more public, it's the silence that allows, as long as something is hidden behind closed doors, the silence allows it to grow. So, or the silence actually limits the capacity for people to respond. There's not enough pressure. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Diana. I think the feeling of the meeting seems to be that, although of course we accept completely what Asa has said, and that is things won't change until the fundamental ideological basis of the apartheid regime changes, a single case can make a start at bringing about change. And I think I speak for Brighton and Hove PSC when I say that we will consider how best to take this forward in collaboration with other groups. We've hosted this meeting, and I feel we now have a responsibility to at least make a start in forming the alliances that could do this. Thank you for your contribution, Diana, and thanks to others and Sarah. I'm now going to turn to each of our three speakers just for a brief summing up in response to some of the points that have been made. And I'm still going to stick to my original plan, which is to finish by 9 o'clock. So Asa, could I turn to you first, as you went first, and ask you for any final observations and comments, please?
Well, it's great to hear everyone's ideas and input. And yeah, I fully agree. I think that Mohammed's case is a really good example. And yeah, I think I really like the idea of what Diana said about making it a public campaign, because it's strategically is a good example, is a good case, because it's been so well attested. I mean, we can say now that the charity spent $7 million investigating Israel's claims and found them to be completely false. If the charity won't do it themselves, we'll do it for them, So it's a particularly egregious example. I mean, and it's a sympathetic one as well, because he's a charity worker, They can't say he's they can say, that Asa Winstanley is delegitimizing Israel, or that, the BDS campaign is delegitimizing Israel. But once they start saying that a charity is delegitimizing Israel, I mean, no doubt they'll try that too, but they're going to make themselves look very silly. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good idea, and it should definitely be done. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Before you switch off, just any response to Steve's point about public opinion within Israel?
I don't think it really matters. I mean, to be brutally honest, I mean, I don't think there is an Israeli peace movement to speak of, I mean, and I don't think it should really matter. I mean, if you look at apartheid South Africa, right up until the end of apartheid, I mean, and Andrew will attest to this. People like Andrew, white South Africans who were against the apartheid regime were in a minority. You know, they were dissidents, really. And Israeli Jews who are against Zionism are in a vanishingly small minority. I mean, they do exist, but, you know, but within Israel is a settler colonial regime which systematically privileges and benefits Jewish people, Jewish Israelis over indigenous Palestinian Arabs. And so because it materially benefits them, the discrimination against Palestinians and in favor of them as Jewish Israelis, then the majority of them are going to unfortunately support that racist sectarian settler colonial system. So we shouldn't really be surprised about that or be waiting. I'm not suggesting you were saying we should wait around for what they're doing, but I mean, I don't think it really matters so much what Israelis think about it. I mean, I think that we should work to try and put pressure on Israel. I mean, yeah, this is a really good point that Andrew made, was that, you know, power concedes nothing. You know, you have to put pressure on Israel, and we have to try and figure out all the ways we can do that. So yeah.
May I turn to Khalil, please, just for one a final comment, please?
Yeah. First, thank you very much for all of you, and thank you, Sarah. Hi, Sarah. How are you? I want. Yeah. How are you? Sarah is a big supporter for Mohammed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sarah.
You're very welcome.
I want from you to see your photo now hang in my home, because you are a big supporter for us. I want to talk about two comments. First, the judge inside the court said to the lawyer, we are under pressure from the foreign minister, Israeli foreign minister. This means that Mohammed case is a political case. This is what the judge and the prosecution said to Mohammed inside the court. We are under pressure from the Israeli foreign minister. This is the first time the political interfere in with the judge. This is, I want from all of you, my dear, to write about Mohammed case in the media. Also, we need the people in UK, in United States, in Australia to write about Mohammed case. Maybe they put their pressure for the Israeli government. This is what I need from all of you, to write about my son case. My son is suffering from the prison, suffering because he is far from his family, suffering from also now without any financial resources after they arrested him. This is many issues he suffering from Mohammed. This need from all the humanitarian people around the world, from the Europe, from the Europe states, to stand with my son. Also, I want to inform you, many Israeli writers stand with my son, and I want to inform you, I write about my son in the Guardian newspaper. I write in Israeli newspaper, Times of Israel. I wrote article. I wrote many articles in Israeli newspaper to show the Israeli people what the injustice system, what about Mohammed. He faced the injustice during his prison. Please, I begged you to write about my son, to make video to the people, to see, because all the people listen to you, not listen to us. Frankly speaking, listen to you and read what you are writing about Mohammed case, not us. Please, thank you.
I'm happy to write if Asa will publish me. It's down to you, Asa. I'm happy to write an article, but I need your help to publish.
And believe me, I wrote letter to President Biden. I wrote a letter to Pope Francis. I wrote a letter to President Jimmy Carter. I wrote a letter to Secretary General of United Nations. I wrote many letters to, but I want to tell you sometimes my writing in vain to them. I don't know why. Why the Secretary General? Yesterday I talked with the Secretary General. Why you are not talking about? I informed him about my son, about the number of coercion to the Secretary General Guterres. 166, please mention in your speech in United Nations, in Security Council, but he not mentioned. Also, I sent to Bob, to Francis, to pray for my son, not to talk, to pray for my son. Maybe after his praying, Israel release him. I wrote to, because I met President Carter during my work. I met him here in Gaza. I wrote to him. I know he is now in 98 age, 93 age, but I wrote to him a letter and clarified to him about my son. I wrote many people, but thank you for Sarah. Thank you for Asa. Thank you for all of you to support my son. Please, this is my beg to you to support my son if you can, in the media, in the newspaper, because now the critical time. Now Mohammed will face another coercion in the end this month or in the beginning of November. Please write about this and inform all the writers to write about my son. Please. Thank you.
Khalil, we will, and we are inspired by you tonight to work together to free Mohammed. Andrew.
Thanks, Barry. I feel very strongly that Khalil should have that last word, which was very important. So let me just, in echoing your support of what Khalil has said and in wishing him, his family, and his son well in the struggle ahead, I would just like to say, if we could make sure that we keep the chat from this meeting, because I think there's some very useful suggestions there, and that if perhaps 2 or 3 people from Brighton and Hove PSC could undertake to convene a meeting of representatives from other PSCs who you think will support such a campaign, I will be happy to attend that meeting as well. And we try and put together a little steering group across the UK that can start spreading the word about Mohammed's case and can also start strategizing and get the various allies that people have suggested, so that we build on Khalil's work, we build on Sarah's work, and that we go away from this meeting knowing that there will be practical and concrete action to try and exert more pressure on Mohammed's behalf.
Well, Thank you, Andrew. And you have a promise from me on behalf of Brighton and Hove PSC that we will do exactly as you suggest. We can't do it alone, obviously. We have limited capacity, like all PSC branches, but we will work to form the kind of coalition that you've talked about. As it happens, we meet as a branch tomorrow evening, and we will take this forward. Khalil, we are going to work hard, inspired by you tonight, and we wish you and your family the very best, and our love and solidarity to you tonight. I'm going to close the meeting. It's gone 9 o'clock, but I want to thank you all for joining us this evening from wherever in the world you're based. Really special thanks are due to our 3 speakers who have generously given their time and their thoughts on this vital issue. We have a tradition in Brighton and Hove PSC of finishing our Zoom meetings by unmuting everyone to enable them to show their appreciation to the speakers. So if Becky would please do that, let's all give our speakers a round of applause. Thank you very much.